Anybody got a question or a topic this morning that they really wanted to work on here? See, Andrew's not here, so you know, just, Bill?
God does not want us to be making images of things on earth or under the earth and water or whatever, but yet the Israelites made an image for him to, I would have to say, rest on. It was like it had wings, like a bird would, but apparently no body. Is that true?
Well, I think, are you talking about the cherubim?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was made by man, okay, and it was fought for God to come down and rest in, but he didn't need to because when they were coming out of Egypt, he was there in a cloud or in a flame, so he really didn't need a spot to rest on. Let's see. Well, I think that's enough to keep you busy for a couple
Well,
of minutes.
I think so. A great question. Okay, let's go to Exodus 20. So we'll start there. Giving the commandments. So Exodus chapter 20, in verse 3, he says, you shall have no other gods before me. Then he says, you shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above or on earth beneath or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. So the prohibition on images, statues, is not to worship them. In other words, you can have a statue of Thomas Jefferson as long as people aren't bowing down to it. Okay, so the prohibition is on making an image of anything that you're going to worship. And of course, it was very difficult for Israel. Remember, when they're going through the wilderness, a bunch of poisonous snakes hit them, right? And a lot of people are dying. And so God had Moses make a bronze serpent and set the serpent up on the pole. And so when somebody was bit, they could look at that serpent and, and they'd be healed. The problem was, in a couple generations, they're actually worshiping, that bronze serpent. It had the name Nehushtan, and they were bowed down to it. See, so man has that tendency to head that direction. It's a subtle pressure by Satan across the board. It's really interesting how, when you look at the pagan religions of the earth, how much they have in common, and they're disconnected in the sense of time and distance, but they all end up in the same places. And so you can tell there's a spiritual force pushing man that direction. And if you turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 10 here, just want to review this point for a second. This is some instruction about the Lord's Supper and a little bit of the challenge that God's given the Corinthians here. 1 Corinthians 10:14. He said, therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. You can see, here's, 1,500 years later, we're still worried about idolatry, right? I speak as to wise men, you judge what I say. Is not the cup of blessing which we bless, a sharing in the blood of Christ. Is not the bread which we break, a sharing in the body of Christ. For since there's one bread, we who are many are one body, for we all partake of the one bread. Now look at the nation Israel, are not those who eat the sacrifices sharers in the altar. So that's a key point there, that the priest, for example, when he offer the offering, say the meat or the grain offering, part of it was burned, but part of it was eaten. And remember, every one of those offerings had to have salt in it. So, of course, you think about it, the high priest, that's going to be his only source of salt. And so another name for the old covenant was a covenant of salt, because every offering had to be offered with salt. But the idea is that when when the priest eats the sacrifice, he's a participant in that altar. So in this case, the priest is a participant of the bronze altar that was out in front, which is the only one that God accepted. So he said, what do I mean then? Verse 19, that a thing sacrificed to idols, or an idol's anything. See, in other words, so at the idol temples, I think I've mentioned when Matt and Charlie and I were in St. Petersburg in August of 1994, one of the places we went was to Peter the Great's palace. You have this massive palace that covers about, 8 square blocks. It's called the Hermitage. He's all by himself. But it was a museum. And in it were Egyptian artifacts. So there was a sarcophagus with an Egyptian mummy in it. I couldn't read the Russian, otherwise I would have never got out of there. But there was a Greek section. There was an actual, kind of a temple to Zeus back there. And these are all things that the Tsars brought. They didn't build those in Russia. They brought them from elsewhere. And then there was a table about this high. It was a marble table, had an image of Poseidon. That's Greek. Neptune's the Latin equivalent. And that marble table, the purpose of that table is where they cut up the meat of the sacrifices and distributed to the congregation. So they'd offer the offering. In Israel's case, all the offerings had to be boiled. And remember that Samuel's sons got into trouble because they'd come and they'd tell whoever's in charge there, hey, I want this meat, but I don't want it boiled. I want it roasted. See, because that's what the pagans would do, is they'd roast their sacrifices. So in Israel, the sacrifices were always boiled. See, God's driving that distinction between Israel and the pagans. Okay, you say boiled meat. Sometimes that just doesn't. Give me barbecue, man. But it had to be boiled, and so the pagans then are going to be eating sacrifices offered on these altars. Okay, so he says, is a thing sacrificed to all idols anything, or idols anything? No. We know that in one manner of speaking, those are figments of imagination. The trouble is, figments of imagination have real human forces and real human consequences, right? And he said, so I say that the things which the Gentiles they sacrifice to demons, see, and not to God, and don't want you to become sharers but of demons. So that lets you know behind every one of those idols, whether it's the Babylonian idols or the Assyrian idols or the Greek or Roman idols, behind every one of those idols is demonic forces. Mm-hmm. See, so when a person would eat that sacrifice offered to, say, Poseidon, he was actually participating in an altar, and he's participating in demons. See, now obviously from a Christian perspective, that's pretty significant, And Paul's pretty plain. You can't drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You can't partake the table of the Lord and the table of demons. You're going to have to make your choice. I don't care whether Grandma wants everybody at our annual feast in September when we all go down to the temple of Zeus and everybody's going to participate, and you used to do it too. I know you're 24 years old and you just, that new thing, whatever, Christianity, whatever. But you've always done, you've always sacrificed to these idols, and so you're going to do that. Okay, now pressure from Grandma can be really strong pressure, okay? And the most feared person in places like Russia and Belarus is the babushka, Grandma. Grandma can come in and pound on the desk of the bureaucrat and say, okay. And, I think God set it up that way. There's really good reasons for grandmas. Grandmas have saved a lot of kids over the years, But he says you can't drink the cup of the Lord, couple of demons. You're going to have to make your choice. You're going to make grandma mad, or you're going to make God mad. See, sometimes it comes down to that. And he says, or do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? We're not stronger than he, are we? So God's got this long warfare against idolatry, and man has this tendency to drift into idol worships. So that's why God puts that prohibition there. He says, you don't make any carved image of anything in heaven, above, on earth, or underneath the earth. You don't bow down and worship him, is the point. Because mankind tends to go that direction. So what about the cherubim? If you go to Exodus, so it's got a series here, Exodus 25. We've got a series of instructions on the tabernacle. Okay, so Exodus chapter 25. So, the Ark of the Covenant, okay? So, in verse 17, Exodus 25:17, you shall make a mercy seat, the fancy word for that's propitiatory, of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide. So, remember, a cubit's about 1.5 feet, okay? And you shall make 2 cherubim of gold. This is what Mel's referring to. Make them of hammered work at the 2 ends of the mercy seat. Make 1 cherub at one end, 1 cherub at the other end. You shall make the cherubim of one piece with the mercy seat at its 2 ends. Remember, with gold, you don't cast gold. Bronze you cast. But with gold, you hammer. You beat it, the technical name for it's malleable, like using a mallet on it. So you hammer gold into the shape that you want it. Okay, so you can see you have to be a pretty fine craftsman to hammer all those details. I mean, sometimes that, hammer's pretty small in the what they're going to use to work the different types of tools on the shaping, but it has to be hammered. Okay, and so the whole mercy seat and the 2 cherubim at the ends of the mercy seat are all going to have to be 1 piece of hammered gold. That's okay. Cha-ching, right? Start running up the calculation on that one, right? And says, the cherubim, in verse 20, shall have their wings spread upward, covering the mercy seat with their wings and facing one another. The faces of the cherubim are to be turned toward the mercy seat. So you got a picture of the wing critters at the ends of the mercy seat, but their wings actually kind of touching in the middle. Okay? And he says, you shall put the mercy seat on the top of the ark. In the ark you shall put the testimony, which I shall give to you. See, and there I will meet with you, meaning Moses. There I will meet with you from between the mercy seat, from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubim, which are upon the ark of the testimony. I will speak to you about all I will give you in commandment for the sons of Israel. So God's basically telling Moses that, look, I'm going to speak to you from between the wings of the cherubim. And so that's why the pillar would descend, and Moses would actually go into the back room of the tabernacle every time that happened. And he'd take the veil off, so his face is looking at the physical semblance of the glory of God, and that would cause his face to shine. And then he'd come back out and deliver the next section of the law to the children of Israel with that face shining. Then he'd put the veil back over his face. So God specifically saying to Moses, that's where I'm going to meet with you. And so the presence of God kind of symbolically, but even more symbolically, dwelt between the wings of the cherubim. Now, of course, when Solomon built the temple, he said, heaven and earth can't contain you, much less this house. So there's a sense in which, God doesn't, he's not stuck, between the wings of the cherubim. But he's doing that to communicate a point here. Okay, so the cherubim then are not to be worshipped. They actually carved cherubim, particularly on the temple. When they had the instructions, there were cherubim carved all over the place on that. Cherubim are basically wing critters, and there's some meaning in the words, but it's pretty hard to tell what they are. They're angelic beings, and don't mess with them, is the idea. But if you turn to Ezekiel chapter 1, remember when Hezekiah prayed, he prayed to the God who dwelt between the wings of the cherubim. Okay. In Ezekiel chapter 1, then, you have this picture of these critters. We can tell from other places that these are cherubim. In this case, there's 4 of them, and they move back and forth, okay? And they're the same as what's in Revelation. You've got the picture of that, okay? In verse 22, then, over the heads of the living beings, there's something like an expanse, like an awesome gleam of crystal spread over their heads. And under the expanse, their wings were stretched out straight, one toward another. Each one also had 2 wings covering his body on one side and on the other. And I heard the sound of their wings like the sound of abundant waters as they went, like a roar of jet airplanes taking off, for example. Like the voice of the Almighty, a sound like the sound of tumult, like an army camp. And whenever they stood still, they dropped their wings. And there came a voice from above the expanse that was over their heads. Whenever they stood still, they dropped their wings. Now above the expanse that was over their heads, there was something resembling a throne, like lapis lazuli in appearance. In that which resembled a throne, high up was a figure with the appearance of a man. And then I noticed from the appearance of his loins and upward something like glowing metal that looked like fire all around within it. And from the appearance of his loins and downward, I saw something like fire. There was a radiance around him. As the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the appearance of the surrounding radiance. And then catch these words. Such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. See, and when I saw it, I fell on my face and heard a voice speaking. So once again, you have a picture of the Lord dwelling above cherubim. So you can see why he's going to be in the tabernacle. He's going to have the picture then, the physical representation of God dwelling between the wings of the cherubim. And that carried through in the temple itself. Remember, you have the Ark of the Covenant, but in the temple itself you have cherubim, 2 of them, each with one with a 15-foot wingspan. And the Holy of Holies was 30 by 30 by 30. And so the wing of one just barely touched the wall here. The wings touched in the center, and then the other wing touched the other wall. And underneath it, you see, was still the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat with the cherubim there. See, so he's picturing every step of the way through that God's dwelling, in the midst of these cherubim. If we turn to Revelation chapter 4, it's always interesting how what mankind does to things. Now, your modern picture of a cherub is a fat little angel going around, shooting arrows, making people love each other. That's not the picture you get of cherubim in the Scripture. Okay, and Revelation 4:1. After these things I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. And the first voice, which I had heard, like the voice of a trumpet speaking with me, said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after these things." Immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was standing in heaven, and one sitting on the throne. And he who was sitting was like the jasper stone, a jardius in appearance, and there was a rainbow around the throne, like an emerald in appearance. You can see how this paralleling what Ezekiel sees in Ezekiel chapter 1. And around the throne were 24 thrones, and upon the thrones I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed in white garments, and golden crowns on their head. And out of the throne came flashes of lightning, sounds, and peals of thunder. And there were 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. And before the throne there was something like a sea of glass, like crystal. See, and in the center and around the throne, 4 living creatures full of eyes in front and behind. There's your cherubim right there. See, God's always pictured as dwelling, in the midst of these cherubim. So that's why God had the physical representation of the cherubim in the temple. Now, if somebody carves a cherubim at home and they start falling down and worship it, then there's a big problem. But see, it wasn't wrong to, have a statue or an image. The problem is if you start worshiping that thing. And like I say, there's a tendency of mankind to go that way. Even in good old atheist Soviet Union, when Lenin died, his body lay in state, in the Kremlin, and people would come by and give their respects. Gary and I were privileged to see the body of Ferdinand Marcos. He lay in his state the same way in the Philippines. Gary and I's analysis looked awful waxy. But see, that's a tendency of people to worship the strong man. Of course, Ferdinand Marcos' son is now the lead guy in the Philippines, and those guys were, they're all communists, they're Marxists, and they have the same type of agenda. See, but man tends to worship anything, other than God, and you see that in Romans chapter 1. So in Romans chapter 1, these guys climbing off the ark and starting to spread out, into the Indus Valley, into the Nile River Valley, and down the Tigris, the Euphrates, and, to head to Europe. It says, in verse 21, Romans 21, says, even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man, birds, four-footed animals, and crawling creatures. You can see that's where mankind goes every time. And it was a tremendous fight throughout the Old Testament to find, create a people, the Jews, who at some point wouldn't worship idols. Remember, it took God from, say, 1446, when they crossed the BC, when they crossed the Red Sea, to 586, where he destroyed the temple because of it. It took him almost, 900 years, to get idolatry driven out of Israel. This gives you an idea how intense this battle is. I used to subscribe to a magazine called Biblical Archaeological Review, and those guys are what they call minimalists. What they mean by that is we are using as little of the Bible as possible. Okay, any chance we get to trash the Bible, we're going to do it. But see, they're always amazed because if there's a lot of evidence of idolatry throughout the land of Israel until the AD or the BC destruction of the temple. After that, there's no idolatry. See, and they're saying, how'd that happen? See, but again, when you know what the Bible says, it makes sense, and it happens at that time. So Mill, it's okay to have cherubim. It's okay to have those, beaten cherubim, and for God's purpose. It's okay for God to have the bronze serpent. It'd be okay to have a statue of some Confederate leader. I just threw that out. Okay, like, can you really? Robert E. Lee. Everybody thought he was a great American, and both sides. But there's another agenda in place. But it's okay to have those statues. But when you get to worshiping, that's the problem. See, and mankind tends to go that. So God's got that stiff warning there, when He gives the Ten Commandments. So, Bill.
On the statues thing, you got to have the statues because the pigeons got to have a place to land.
True.
Okay. But let's go back to the cherubim. I'm under the impression that the average Israelite never got to see it. It was always covered when it was moved and stuff, and guarded when it was inside of the tent. Yeah, could you kind of expand on that part of the fact that the Israelites really never saw it?
Yep, that's correct. Moses saw it, because he went in there and the Lord spoke to him. But again, there was a pillar of cloud in there. When the high priest went into the back room, he had to move the altar of incense so that the smoke covered the altar of incense, and he's sprinkling it blind into the, he has a good idea where the Ark of the Covenant is and the mercy seat, but he's sprinkling it blind through the smoke of the incense, so he doesn't get to see it. I don't have any details on that, but I have an idea when it came time for them to pick up the tabernacle and move. No, only the priest could do the Ark of the Covenant. The Levites could do the rest of it, but only the priest could do the Ark of the Covenant. I have an idea that they walked backward and covered that Ark of the Covenant is my guess, that they did it that way. So you're right, they never saw it. And Moses might have seen it, but nobody else probably ever saw it. Anything else, Mel?
Somebody had to make it.
Somebody had to make it. Yep. The craftsman.
They saw it.
Yeah. And then once it's out of his hands, never to be seen again, basically. Yep. Good point. Anything else? Anybody want to comment on that? Nick?
I heard you say recently that, those ancients, they weren't dumb. It wasn't that they were just falling down before a piece of gold or wood or something like that, that they understood that behind what they were bowing down to was a force. And you pointed out this morning that force was demonic. From what you're explaining this morning, I'm just sitting here thinking, it would have been really easy as a person back in those times to mistake what Israel did for God in their worship for pagan worship. I mean, in appearances, it would look the same. So that fact that they understood what they were bowing down to really is an important thing to understand here, that they knew it wasn't just a piece of wood. There was something else behind it, just like we do.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a great point, Nick. And see, that's why it's interesting. See, was there any image of God in the back room of the tabernacle? No. Is there any image of God in the back room of the temple? No. Is there any image of Zeus in the back room of Zeus' temple? Yes. See, that's a major difference. See, and that's why God is pretty insistent. Several times he said to Moses, he said, you make sure that, the people, you let them know that you saw no form. You people, on Mount Sinai, you saw no form. There's no form. You didn't. No. See, that because the tendency to go exactly that direction. See, on the surface, a great point. It looks parallel. You got the temple of Dagon, say in say the Philistine cities, right? And Ekron, for example, and so it looks like what's going on in the tabernacle, right? And so Israel needed the magic box to go in and help them win the war against the Philistines, and Philistines promptly captured what they thought was the magic box, the Ark of the Covenant. They put it in the temple of Dagon, right? Remember what happened? Next day, Dagon's bowed down to the Ark of the Covenant, right? So they jacked the statue up, which, how do you believe in a God that, you have to come in and, okay, get the jacks and the timber boys. Let's get this statue raised back up. How much power does that have? But the next day they come in, remember what happened? It was not only fallen over, but the head and the arms and legs were separated from the trunk. That's a pretty good indication, that this is not the same. On the surface, see, it looks the same. But God did things like that all the way through to make sure there is a big distinction between idol worship. What Satan tries to do is he tries to imitate what God does. See, he tries to have something that looks somewhat close, see, to pull people in and get them twisted in that direction. See, so what God does, pretty quick, here comes Satan doing the same thing. See, that's a great example. Further comment, Nick? Anybody else want to comment? Gary.
Just back to Mel's comment about not too many people seeing the tabernacle. You know, it was parked in the house of Abinadab for 20 years. So then you're saying presumably it was all covered, and then they had their parade to bring it back to Jerusalem, and the same thing would have happened because the people were all around seeing that, but it would have been covered.
Yeah. Well, you remember what happened when 50,000 went and looked at it?
Oh yeah.
You know, I mean, that was a Disneyland attraction that did not go well. You know, come see the Ark of the Covenant. 50 cents. Yeah. And oops. Yeah. Good point. Further comments here? Oh, okay.
I think God, knowing the tendency of mankind, like you're saying, is probably good reason why we don't have much information about what Jesus looked like physically as well.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure he's blonde and blue-eyed. But, well, I mean, and he had long hair. Yeah. Yeah. Wavy hair. Yeah. I mean, yeah. It's mankind really. Again, there's that natural tendency, and of course you see in Catholicism, what do? They make their statues of the saints, the statues of Joseph and Mary, statues of Jesus. I mean, every Catholic church building in the Philippines has got to display the 10 Commandments out front, very prominently displayed. And you walk in, the first thing, there's a statue of Jesus that you bow down to. The second commandment says you don't make any carved image of anything heaven above, on earth beneath, and you don't bow down to them. So, well, they don't call it bowing down. You got to genuflect. Okay, see, that's kind of like, it's not a lie, it's disingenuous. It's a dissimulation. I mean, lie is too clear, but if you dissimulate, that sounds pretty intellectual. It's just a lie, but yeah. So, you see, mankind has that tendency. And guys in the Philippines, you'd be up there and there'd be this kind of statue of Mary here off the side, and the Filipino guys, they're pretty plain. There's the idol. That's what they call it. There's the idol, because that's what it is. So, Mel, do you have another comment?
Well, you raise a point in my mind, but it's somewhat irrelevant. Why is gold not castable? I thought anything could be cast. Any metal could be, as long as it's fluid, bring it to a fluid state, that it could be cast.
Well, the nature of gold is such that it's, melting temperature is so low that it doesn't really handle that way. So they always beat it into shape rather than casting it. So there's
It's soft
it's very soft.
and, okay.
Yeah. So okay, let's say anybody here got a gold ring. Okay. How many carat? 18? 12, 16? Why not 24 karat gold rings? Too soft. See, even, I have a ring. Katie, I better tell you where that is. But, I have pretty big hands. I tried to go down to REI here the other day and get some gloves so I can hold on to the ropes on that raft, and they're having a hard time, finding gloves that go, hey, you got pretty big hands. So, so even my 16 karat ring or whatever it was, stretched, it turns into an oblong, see, because that's not even pure gold. See, so gold, it doesn't work good to try to cast it. It's too soft, and it doesn't cool fast enough, and then try to get it out of the mold, it doesn't hold its shape. See, so that's why gold is hammered. See, all those metals have their own characteristics. Now you can't say you got cast iron. You can saw cast iron. You can take a torch, and cut not copper. So if you try to saw copper, it's just like trying to saw bubble gum. Okay, and we had a big spill underneath one of our furnaces there, in Great Falls. It was, I think, 220,000 pounds of copper down there. And they finally got torches hot enough, had to have special torches at 15,000 degrees to try to cut through copper. Those poor old Boilermakers down there trying to handle torches. You know, they finally got it out of there, but you see, just every metal has its own characteristics and own properties, so you gotta work with them. Mel?
Well, copper and, well, let's say cast iron, their ability to transfer heat is amazing. You can take let's say a 10-foot round, let's say an inch round rod as steel, and you could heat one end of that thing to a glowing red, and you could still pick it up on the other end with your hand. You try that with cast iron or copper, and you're gonna have a burn that you'll never recover from.
Right. See, and what's really interesting about that, see, copper conducts heat so fast that's why you can't use a regular torch on copper, because copper conducts the heat away so much faster than even the cast iron does. So it's, again, all those metals have their different characteristics. Gutenberg, he was a metallurgist, and when he's doing the printing press, he ended up using an alloy of antimony, because antimony is the one element, like water. When water freezes, it gets bigger. Okay, most everything else, when it freezes, it ends up smaller, which then it tends to hang up in the bottom of the mold. See, it's very, very difficult. So, but with antimony, see, in those small letters, antimony expands when it cools, when it crystallizes. See, and so he could use antimony because it had those special characteristics. So it's amazing how God set things up. I mean, it's not arbitrary. The periodic table that Mendeleev discovered, those are very interesting and very important. And but every one of them's got their own characteristics. Titanium, for example, or vanadium, molybdenum. The pit, East Pit and Butte, they get enough molybdenum out of there to pay the expenses of mining out of that pit. See, but molybdenum is pretty interesting. What's all used for? But they all are different. And gold and silver, copper. They're a special group of elements that tend to be able to conduct electricity very well. Silver and gold both conduct electricity better than copper, but I don't think you're going to be wiring your house with silver or gold. So copper's cheaper, but there's just special characteristics about those. When we used to make copper for windings for the Westinghouse, for the alternators and stuff, we always had a certain amount of silver in there to increase the conductivity in the windings for the alternators. So again, and mankind tends to discover that by experience. Guy probably tried casting gold. Man, this is not working. See, well, maybe we can hammer it. If all else fails, get a hammer, right? Yeah, hey, it worked. So, good. Any other comments or thoughts or questions here this morning? Yeah, Nick?
I was just thinking about the Ark of the Covenant, that it was basically 3 foot 9 inches long, 2 foot 3 inches high, or wide it said. So that's a hunk of gold, one piece. When you start thinking about how big that thing was to start with, before they started hammering it, it was probably bigger than that.
Remember, it was acacia wood overlaid with gold.
Okay.
That helps.
Okay, so it wasn't one hunk of gold.
Yeah, I mean, the gold that they used on top of the acacia wood had to be one hunk of gold.
Still pretty big piece.
Still pretty
then.
big piece.
Okay. That's impressive.
Impressive. Yeah. And where did they get the gold? Well, they took it from the Egyptians, didn't they? Yeah. See, I mean, God told them, he says, well, ladies, you know, before you leave Egypt here, you ask all the Egyptian ladies for all their jewelry, right? And remember, every society has had a tendency, because they don't trust banks, we'll probably get there, okay? Every society has had a tendency to store their wealth on the women, okay? The jewelry, you know, the neck rings, the nose rings, the ankle bracelets, the arm bracelets, the rings, okay? That's how they stored their wealth. Now to us, it's really, but if you go to India, that's exactly what you see. And the most gold I ever saw in one place was in a comparatively small town of Kottayam, where Benoit used to live. And you walk in, that place is a room, from me to that corner, okay, nothing but gold. I mean, nothing but gold. See, India is a poor country, right? See, so that's how they store their wealth. They don't trust the banks, and so that's what the Egyptians were doing. See, they're storing their wealth on the women. So when the Israelites are asking the ladies for their jewelry, they're taking the wealth of Egypt with them, and that's why Egypt is spoken of as plundered in the process. But see, they used that then when they came time to erect the tabernacle. Moses asked the people for a free will offering. See, and they ended up bringing too much, and so he said, hey, enough, got enough. But that's where the bronze came from, that's where the silver came from, that's where the gold came from, is off of all that jewelry that they took from the Egyptians. See, God, now the scripture doesn't say, you know, God had this plan here, that he was going to do this. It just here's some instruction. So you have to go back and look at it and say, you know what, there's because how is a bunch of people in the wilderness come up with enough gold and bronze and stuff to make the tabernacle? We're not going to have it, see, but God set it up. And that lets you know, see, because as important as Moses and the people of Israel were, you know, they're not as important as we are. You know, if you go to Hebrews chapter 11, see, the tendency, again, is to think that, yeah, those are the great guys back there. Why? Because those things were done in the physical realm. See, the physical realm is very impressive. You know, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego dancing in the furnace, you know, and coming out, you know, not even having a tinge of smoke on them. You know, that's pretty impressive. I mean, Nebuchadnezzar thought it was impressive. See, those physical things tend to be impressive. But the spiritual things in the spiritual realm are much more impressive, but we have to be educated, you know, upgraded in our thinking. You know, got to have our hard drive rewired or something in order to be able to process at this level. So the general tendency is to think those are the really awesome guys. But see, the really awesome guys are the New Covenant guys. You just can't see it. Just can't see it. Hebrews 11, 39 and 40, talking about some of these great guys in the Old Testament, says all these, Hebrews 11, 39, all these, having gained approval through their faith, did not receive what was promised. In other words, the promise, the indwelling Holy Spirit, because God had provided something better for us, so that apart from us, they would not be made perfect. See, when Jesus is coming back, he's coming back for the bride. But what he's going to do is going to throw these old covenant people in with us, which is only fair. Had they lived in our time, they would have been Christians. God had to take the time to get all the groundwork laid for Jesus to come and to set things in motion for the new covenant. But see, the really great people, the great people are the people you see sitting here. These are the most awesome people to ever inhabit planet Earth. Most awesome. Well, I don't see that. Well, of course you're not going to see that in the physical realm. See, one final scripture on that, 2 Corinthians chapter 3. See, 2 Corinthians 3, verse 18, just a quick comment. It said, but we all see with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, see, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory, just from the Lord the Spirit. That image you saw in Ezekiel 1 of the Lord, that's us on the inside. That's us on the inside, transformed into that same image. That would be impressive, wouldn't it? See, and that's what God's trying to do, trying to help us. See, if we can see ourselves that way, what are we afraid of? What lack of confidence would we have? What is it that we can't overcome? You know, I mean, whatever it is, we can do this, right? We can do this. See, and you can see how important that is as God lays it down. But He's got to go through quite an education process to get us up to speed where we're looking at it the way that we're supposed to.